Alrighty, Francisco. I think we can slowly get started. Um,
That sounds good.
let's do it. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar titled "Migrating Your SAP Licenses, Roles, and Authorizations to S/4HANA: S/4HANA Roadmap 2.0." I'm your host Seb, and this is another entry in the voquz webinar series. If you'd like to receive additional invites, you can go to our website, voquz.com, and sign up. We do these webinars roughly, I would say, every month, at least once a quarter, to talk about the most relevant news in the SAP licensing space. Right, I'm Seb Shoves. I'm the VP of North America. With me today is Francisco Hansen, based out of Mexico. And Francisco, you're the Global Director of SAP License Advisory for us. Is that right?
I hope I'm still in that position. Special welcome to all of you with the Danish family names. I'm seeing a Christensen and another Hansen here. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I myself have a Danish mother, but have been growing up in Spain, now in Mexico. And it will be a pleasure to give you an introduction about the newest things that we have found regarding licensing in the area of S/4HANA and the changes that you will be expecting when migrating to this new platform.
Excellent. Yeah, can't wait to hear about it, Francisco. Also, the focus for today's webinar is North America, so the US, Mexico, UK, so we also have a couple attendees from Europe. But I think you mentioned to me we have a ton of people that signed up from South America. So if you want to say a couple words in Spanish, be my guest.
Sí, con mucho gusto. Bienvenidos los hispanohablantes del grupo. Será un placer responder sus preguntas también al final y están invitados a contactarnos personalmente en el caso de que tengan alguna necesidad o alguna pregunta relacionada con el tema. Sorry
Awesome.
for all the English speakers, but I will now turn to the English language so that everyone is with us.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you just joined this webinar and you're wondering why we're doing this in Spanish, please don't be afraid. The whole webinar is going to be in English. We just wanted to say hello to our Spanish-speaking friends. All right, what's the agenda for today? Let's jump right in. So we're going to start with a quick introduction about voquz. I'm going to tell you why we're in this licensing space and why we're talking about this today. Francisco will give you an overview of all the changes regarding licensing around S/4HANA, and there's actually quite a few changes, so this is going to be interesting. I think most of you are going to want to see what opportunities you have to achieve cost savings. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit and also talk about how you can expedite the migration of your roles and authorizations. And we're going to close out by looking into the benefits of inviting additional key stakeholders into the conversation, which is something that's often overlooked when you're planning this monumental task of migrating over to S/4HANA. Last but not least, I'm going to show you a couple of offerings that we've put together specifically for those companies that are considering the move to S/4HANA, and you'll have an opportunity toward the end to ask any questions that are pertinent to either your current situation or an upcoming migration. So please use the chat functionality or the question functionality of GoToWebinar. We might take a couple of questions as they come in, but we'll definitely be addressing everything toward the end of the webinar. All right, so let's do a quick introduction about voquz, and I'd actually like to ask you a poll. If you would indulge me real quick, I'm going to bring up this poll for everybody. Can you please let us know where you are in the S4 adoption cycle? It's always really interesting for us as we're moderating these webinars to get an understanding of where you are, if you've done the migration already and you're dealing with maintenance of the existing systems, or if you're looking into doing some readiness assessments, if you're negotiating with SAP. Give us a quick idea of where you are in this process. I see about 30% of the votes have come in, and we'll give you just another 10 or 20 seconds to finish voting. Francisco, it looks like, just to give you a quick inside view as the results are coming in, a lot of people doing their readiness assessments.
Yeah, well, basically, what we are seeing now in the market is that some specialized companies are helping SAP's clients to understand what an S/4HANA migration means and providing additional tools to what SAP is already offering to assess database sizes, Z transactions that can be migrated and which ones can't be migrated. So most people are right now exactly doing this readiness assessments to understand the size of the project that is in front of them. On the other side, and this is what we will treat today, most people don't understand what is involved from the contracting point of view in migrating to S/4HANA. There are interesting chances, and we will try to explain this in the next few minutes.
Perfect, and you see the results right now. So no one already running S4, which is very interesting. So we have about 60% of people doing their readiness assessments, 14% still in the license negotiation. So there's still opportunities for you guys to apply some of the best practices we're going to discuss today. And then 30% are not really interested in S4, but you'll still be able to learn something today because we're going to talk about ways to decrease overall SAP spending. So that, with that being said, let's do a quick introduction about voquz, give you an idea who we are. The voquz group was actually incorporated in 1980. So as a company, we've been operating for almost, I guess, getting close to 40 years now. Francisco and I work for a division called voquzlabs. We're a global provider of SAP-focused services. We have two applications. We're going to talk a little bit about them today, but the content really is focused on how you guys can manage your migration. But just to give you a brief overview, so we focus on the licensing space and the authorization management space. So samQ, which is the logo at the bottom right here, is our SAP add-on to automatically manage SAP licensing, manage your users, reduce license cost. And then setQ is another SAP add-on that allows you to essentially set up access controls, compliance controls, and also identity management. So with that being said, here's how all of this works together. The marketing team endearingly refers to this to the voquz fidget spinner, and you can kind of see how all the gears fit together. Obviously, authorization management, giving your people access to run SAP transactions, authorizing them to perform certain job duties, is intricately connected to SAP licensing. The more access someone has, the more they do within SAP. Typically, the more expensive user license they require to allow them that kind of work. So you can kind of see the overlap between these two topics. The focus for us certainly is the long-term optimization of license costs, so making sure we're not overspending, which is quite difficult to manage for most SAP customers, especially if you're a large corporation and you've been running SAP for a long time. The bottom part that marries all of this is our advisory group that Francisco runs. And the focus for that is essentially helping clients develop their own strategies to reduce costs, to manage indirect access, which is a topic that we've probably done at least 10 webinars on in the last 2 years. We do audit defense, but we also consult with clients on how to manage their authorization concept, especially as they move over to S/4HANA. So last question that I'm going to ask you real quick is specifically around indirect access. There's a lot of chatter at the moment around how customers can manage the digital access they have at their firms. There's a adoption program SAP put out. So let us know if this is something that you're aware of, if everyone is fully clued in into the details. We're not going to talk about this too much today. If it turns out that the majority of you guys have not looked into indirect access, I'm sure Francisco wouldn't mind adding 2 or 3 minutes of additional content just to explain to you why this is important as you move over to S/4HANA, and why the current adoption program is something that you should consider. Alrighty, what do we have? Oh, still 70% almost have not done a cost impact analysis of indirect access. So Francisco, I think this is important for us. as we're running through the content today, because the audience today is largely still sort of at the beginning of looking into this. So side note to you and I.
Yeah,
Good.
we'll go into this point later on after explaining the basics for that. Yeah.
All right, so why is the webinar titled S/4HANA Roadmap 2.0 today? What we see in the SAP space is that a lot of companies are focusing heavily on the technical migration of how do you move over from ECC to the latest generation of SAP's enterprise resource planning software, right? What does that migration look like? What's the best partner that you can choose? And we often see that in that process, the part that's not getting a lot of consideration is what the impact is on your licensing contract, the licensing fees, what products you need to trade in because SAP is maybe ending support for them and you have to adopt a new cloud application in place. And also, how does all of this new technology impact your existing role design, which is an interesting question, especially for those of us who have been running SAP for 20 or 30 years, and now they're looking at this massive change. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction into SAP licensing. This is going to be 1 or 2 minutes, and then Francisco will take it from here. So what are the main components of SAP licensing? In most older contracts, we see that between 60 or 70% of the overall license spend is actually going toward named users. So that's a significant portion of not just the licenses you procure, but also the annual maintenance you're spending. What a lot of companies are surprised to hear is that there's about 50 different categories of these named user categories, right? So what type of license do you actually want to assign to the user base? And it's way more than just the professional or the limited professional, which a lot of long-term customers might only have in their inventory. Next, there's engines, so all other SAP products that are being sold on the basis of a different licensing metric. This could be payroll processing. It could even be something, I guess Hybris is a different application altogether, but based on business objects licensing, there's very different shades to how the engine might apply to your contract and how it's measured. There's also database, which will become even more relevant in the S/4HANA age because you have to run S/4HANA on an underlying HANA database. And then there's the topic of indirect access. The last 2 bullet points, database fees and indirect access fees, they're going to increase as you move over to S/4HANA, whereas the traditional user spend is going to likely decrease a little bit. So we'll see a reshuffling of these core components, and it's really up to the customer to decide what is needed, what's been purchased in the past. So if you've accumulated any shelfware, now really is the time to look into your entire bill of materials, because this is going to be important as you move over to S/4HANA, because it's essentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to redesign parts of your contract and optimize the cost structure for the next 5 to 10 years. Just one example of how critical this optimization piece can be is the fact that on average, we see 30% of companies' named user population is incorrectly licensed. And if you take a closer look at the next level, out of those 30%, you have a third of users that are no longer active. So we're spending money on licenses for dormant users. And 2/3 of those are actually incorrectly classified, meaning that either we're giving them too expensive of a license for what they're doing in SAP, or we're not compliant in the license assignment, which can also increase risk. So that's just one example of where things can go wrong. We've looked at all of the components of licensing in general. And Francisco, why don't you tell us a little bit now about the S/4HANA world and what changes customers need to be aware of as they're making their migration?
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for your introduction. And let me see if I can handle your screen. Yeah. Okay, so as Seb already announced, things are going to change regarding the weight of the different components. In the past, it was like user licenses could make up to 60% of your contract. This is going to change, especially in the area of indirect access and in the area of database. You need to really look deeply into that. Now, we know that ECC or ERP development is going to be kept up until 2025 and maintenance for it. So SAP is very toughly trying to move its customer base onto S4HANA. It is a new product, not an extension, so a relevant migration project is attached to that. Models are changing, so some of them will keep more or less the same, but many modules will be included in the basis system, in the core system. On the other hand, a lot of them will be kept outside and you will need to license them separately. There are lots of documents regarding that, regarding database sizing, regarding scope descriptions. You can see on the left side here one of them, which is basically the S4HANA on-premise feature scope description. It's a very interesting document to understand what is going on there and which features you will find where. Now, let us look into the commercial part of what is changing. That means the contracting part. There are products, and this is this like-for-like principle. There are products that will have a similar name in the S4HANA platform as they had in the ERP platform. So you will be able to exchange them. You will find conversion policies for that. Then you have compatibility packs. That means you will be able, once you sign for S4HANA, you sign up a new contract to keep the old software in parallel until 2025, so that you have a comfortable migration period. And there is a cloud extension policy, but these are just generics. Let's look a bit into details. Now, the new licensing model, what do we need to understand here? First of all, you have the users part. Users, as Seb said in the past, and if you look into this SAP published file on their help portal, you will see that SAP has more than 50 different user types. Historically, 15 more or less actually in the actual price list. Now in S4HANA, we find 4 different user types: enterprise management for professional use, functional use, productivity use, and then the developers. They won't have the same weight as they had in the past financially or economically in your contract, but still very important, and I will explain you why. Then you have on top of the S4HANA core, the line of business or industry solutions like treasury, like cash management, things like that, that you will still need to license separately. We have digital access, and digital access or indirect use, indirect access, that means applications that you have connected to your SAP system. This is a critical point. We are seeing clients with, I think the highest one that I have seen had a risk of $20 million in digital access. So you need to really deeply look into that. And this is not an option in the future. Digital access will be an elementary part of your S4HANA contract. So before you migrate, you need to look into digital access. You need to run SAP's tool. And once you have the audit results that you can do internally, you need to get some assessment on what part of what SAP is measuring is really digital access and which part can you turn down based on SAP's own licensing rules. HANA. Now, the database is neither an option. In the past, you had database prices going from 8% of the total license value for a Microsoft installation or DB2 going up to 20% for Oracle. And now regarding HANA, you have two licensing options. One is the runtime version. We'll go deeper into that. You have the full version with a lot of add-ons on it. Let's go into the details. So now on the user licenses, you have here a description, generic description, and this generic description won't get more details. What do you need to understand? It is like you can start with a functional user, which tells you basically in detail what is included in that. The professional use, the professional license that tells you only you have all role required operations, which basically says this is an all-in role. Functional use is somewhere in between, and then you have the productivity use for people working in shipping in your warehouses, in material control production, or people that only use their time management functions within SAP. Now, still very important, if you look into the prices that we see, I can't tell you these are actual list prices, but they could be. And you see, they go from $450 on a list price up to $5,250. So it's still very important to understand which license you need for whom. Okay, let's get into compatibility packs. I told you already, this is basically what SAP is providing you to be able to have together the new platform working with the old platform for migration sakes, for things that you won't migrate in the near time. It is restricted on a timely basis until end of 2025. And please read this note that you have here to understand what is included there. Now, this is a very important part here, and these are the transition paths. Transition paths means how do I change the actual contract that I have for ERP into an S/4HANA contract. Now, you have a very few clients group may be willing, wanting, able to go from their actual ERP system on premise directly to a cloud system. Basically because the cloud version of S/4HANA is still on its starting phase. So you won't find all features that you have today on the on-premise system in the cloud basis. But for some smaller clients, this may be an option. And the process that you get here is what is called the cloud extension. We'll get later into this one. The one transition path that is the most probable for all clients is one of the two next, which is product conversion and contract conversion. So let's get into that. Let's see if this works here. Let's start with the product conversion. So what is a product conversion? This means that you are entitled to convert products one by one. So you don't want to migrate your whole contract. You maybe have a bunch of 5 contracts that you closed with SAP during the last years, and you decide to do a migration, a phased, phase-based migration, product by product. So you are entitled to 100% credit in 2019. This is a strange thing, but this is the way SAP presented this at Sapphire. So we have no confirmation that this is something that will still work in the next years. For now, SAP is only committing to give you 100% credit of products that you migrate for this year. Let's see what comes up the next years. I can hardly imagine that SAP will take this offer away. But anyway, this is what we got right now. You keep your same contractual agreements. This conversion is based on the idea that you convert, let's say cash management from the SAMERP module into S/4HANA cash management. So you convert same products for future same products. You can't change cash management against C/4HANA or some things like that. So this is what they call line item mapping. And for some clients, this may be an attractive option because you go step by step, and it focuses on engines with equivalent products. So you need to really reassess your contract line items and see how far this is feasible for you. This is an option for you. But this is one of both options. We said product conversion. The next one is contract conversion. What does that mean? That means you take your actual contract and you don't not contract item by item, but you go an all-in approach and say, I'm changing my whole contract, my whole bill of materials for S/4HANA products, as far as this is possible, of course. In some cases, you will keep your old products that have no newer version, but for most products, you will be able also here to get 100% credit. And the idea is that you don't try to really go line by line item, but you just migrate everything as a whole, the whole contract as a whole, and you need to really recontract with a new S/4HANA contract with everything that is available there. Now, they say no conversion for SAP named users, exception retail, banking, healthcare, and so on. So this is the rule, and as in every rule, there are exceptions, and this is something that you must understand. This is the general approach. What happens in the market is not always what you are seeing here. SAP brings out a certain guideline on how to do a conversion, but fact is, everything is negotiable and in the software market, and you need to understand that. So what is the approach here? The approach is, first of all, understanding what your project approach is. If you're going on a brownfield approach, or if you're going on a greenfield approach, what the timeline is for your migration. Once you know that, you can decide if you will go product by product or rather do a contract conversion, and start analyzing in what time frame you will be migrating every product to understand what is the most appropriate approach for my contract. Now, another thing, of course, that you need to look into is your bill of materials, from the standpoint that not everything that you have on your contract may be a candidate for migration. You may want to keep products that are really going down, that you're still keeping, but have already planned on replacing them for SAP or non-SAP products. So you need to go really on a line by line way here. Let me go over that.
Francisco, can I ask you a
Sorry.
quick question
Yeah,
before you
please.
proceed? So I want to add one thing, and then I want to ask you a question. So the one thing to add, because you just mentioned it, the interesting thing about these migration paths is that there's always a different limitation that you need to be aware of. It's a little bit like navigating your way through a maze. And the one thing that comes to mind when you spoke about greenfield versus brownfield is that, you know, S/4HANA comes in so many different flavors if you're considering the cloud or on-prem version of it. The public cloud, for instance, that SAP has as an offering, you can only do greenfield in the SAP public cloud. So I want to add that real quick because there's so many different dependencies between your preferred approach, the technical migration, and then also the best fitting model for S/4HANA and the underlying license implications. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I mean, this is one of the big limitations of going to the cloud. So what do we see in the market? Basically, what we see is that most clients, well, bigger companies, they are using like some subsidiaries, smaller daughter companies are being used as a test for the S4HANA public or private cloud platform. They don't have these large requirements regarding functionality. You probably want to consolidate their financial results, the financial numbers. In this case, the cloud extension is a real option for subsidiaries, for smaller companies. Then also for smaller SAP clients, it is an option. But yeah, I mean, greenfield approach, which is basically drawn here as new implementation. The problem is there. If you, of course, have been developing own transactions, set transactions, own software within SAP, this is basically thrown away what you have done for years. So this is a hard option to take if you have done so, which is different if you go for S4HANA on-premise, of course.
Yeah, and so I think it's just interesting to kind of develop a mental map of which decision then impacts another decision. So that's why I wanted to add it. And so here
Yeah.
comes the question, Francisco. I feel like your answer is going to be it depends, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So you do a lot of projects to help customers negotiate their S/4HANA contracts and bring down the overall fees and cost of that migration. Would you say that the contract conversion is typically the better option because it gives you more leverage, or is there reasons for SAP customers to really consider both of these options, so product versus contract? What's your take on that?
Well, I must honestly say we are still on the start. You saw the poll, and most of clients right now they are assessing the process of migrating. So, but yes, I think the trend that you told is very realistic. In the end, regarding licenses, we are talking about a negotiation is something where you need leverage, and leverage means as much volume as you can handle at once, as you can talk about future planning. How do I get the biggest volume into the negotiation to have a bigger leverage? And this means mostly contract migration. This is a fact, absolutely. I'm with you there.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, let me see if I still got control here. Yeah. Now, these are what I showed you is basically the framework, the migration path framework that SAP set up. Now, this is no negotiation. This is just the framework within which you must move when speaking with SAP, the things that you need to consider. Now, let's look into the details of this. What is happening in the software market? SAP is a software company. They're on this, they're on the stock market, so they need to be reliable. They need to have a plannable growth, and this is what drives basically the going away from a perpetual software model to a subscription-based model. So moving you to S4HANA, moving you to, I mean, of course, we have perpetual licenses and in S4HANA on the on-premise version, but this is a first step in going from perpetual licenses to subscriptions. So S4HANA is strategic for SAP, and it is very important for them. It is not a God-given thing that all clients will migrate within the next years. And in reality, SAP is also risking for some clients to go away from SAP due to migration costs to S4HANA. So it is very important, it is strategic to move the client base to S4HANA, and you need to bear this in mind when you negotiate with SAP. So you have leverage, and S/4HANA is a chance. Now, you may know that when you have a running SAP contract, it is very difficult to negotiate a decrease of your maintenance volume with SAP. Why is that? Because every loss that they have on the maintenance base, they need to make up for to still have the revenues on the top side and still be reliable in the stock market. So every loss that they have is difficult. Still, S/4HANA migration is a big chance for you to look into what you have regarding shelfware, tie up and trade in everything that you purchased like 10 years ago and you haven't been using for the last 5 years, and change that for new licenses. On top of that, user licenses. You purchased some 2 years ago your user licenses, and now after a time you found out that you need other licenses, that you need fewer licenses, different licenses. So clean up, use this time before you start now negotiating to SAP with SAP to understand what your demand is. So drive demand management, use the next months, the next year to understand what your real need is. If you only have in your contract professionals, limited professionals, instead of the 15 or 13 other options that are on the price list, analyze what you have. With tools like ours, like others that are on the market, you have the chance to drive simulations. And if you have a client base of 3,000 users, start simulating the new 3 user types that you have in S/4HANA to understand what your real need is based on the transactions that your users are executing today. You can do that, and you can prepare to understand what your demand will be. What would you be asking for SAP? So don't let SAP drive this. Don't let SAP take your old contract, offer you the new version in S/4HANA, but be the one who is driving this process. So drive down your need, your purchase base, your bill of materials to the real need that you found out after working 2, 5, 10 years with SAP, because you know much more today than you knew when you started. Now, digital access. You may have found out that SAP has in their tools a system, a tool which is called Digital Access Estimation Tool. And estimation is the word here. It is not a measurement tool, it is an estimation tool. And once we pull out the reports for all the technical users in all systems that we have, that you have, with your estimation, with SAP's estimation tool, we suddenly find out that there are lots of exceptions, repeated data, data that is master data and shouldn't be counted, transactions where you find justifications why you shouldn't be paying for them. So please let someone who understands a lot of that look into your situation and see if what comes out of these reports is the truth or not. SAP is getting better in measuring those results, but it is not the truth what you find there. It is an estimation, and you need to analyze those results. You may be able to drive costs down by a lot. Now, HANA, do I have, did we cut out? Yeah, we are getting into HANA, so I will postpone this one. Understand leverage in negotiations. So SAP is promoting within their sales teams migration to S/4HANA with special offerings. By the way, Digital Access has right now also a special offering, which is called the Digital Access Adoption Program, DAP, so to say. And they're offering special discounts this year that are very interesting. it should be interesting to get a look into digital access this year and see if this special offering of SAP is suitable for you or not. Please don't think that this is the only option, but at least you should evaluate that. Now, leverage negotiations, what I'm talking about here is you are on the power side right now. You won't be that in 2025. In 2025, you will be under pressure. It will be SAP who comes to you and says, well, we won't be able to offer you support if you don't change to S4HANA. Today, you will be one of the clients who helps SAP to increase the percentage of clients who are moving to S4HANA and tell a good story in the stock market. So you have big leverage right now. You are one of the reference clients potentially. You are one of the success stories. So use that leverage in negotiations. Make use of those transition paths we talked about and really build up financial scenarios to find out which one of both or the three transition paths is the most feasible, most suitable for you. Now, terms and conditions. This is a difficult one. We are talking mostly with IT people here. Still, in our consulting department, we very much look into terms and conditions. And I am so astonished, afraid, surprised by what I find there. For example, right this morning, I was reading an SAP contract, a perpetual license, with a contract term telling the client that once his contract with SAP ends, he is expected to deinstall everything and is not allowed to use the software anymore.
That doesn't sound like a perpetual license, does it?
It doesn't really sound, and it's amazing that you find this one. I found another one who had a what do you call this? A penalty for not being compliant. So if SAP drives a license audit within this client and finds out he's not compliant, he's able, on top of selling at a list price the licenses that he's lacking, there was a penalty payment within the terms and conditions of this contract. This is unacceptable, and most of clients don't have these contracts. Don't ask me where they come from. Don't ask me who has designed, redacted these contracts. I have no idea, but they are there on the market, and I really intensively recommend you to look into your terms and conditions and make sure that what you have there is what is market standard and not some strange deviation coming from I don't know whom, but you find the situations, and I find them more often than what I'm used to. So
Francisco, if I can chime in real
yeah,
quick. So I think one of the themes that's coming through right now is the importance of bringing together the right stakeholders, right? You have the legal department, you have
yeah,
procurement, you have the basis team that's often tasked with assigning user licenses, doing some of that initial analysis. And in most cases, we don't see those stakeholders working together, which causes issues in the individual areas that all together make up what should be a successful migration. So we do have a slide on that toward the very end. I'm also looking at the time. I do want to
oh
make
yeah,
sure we have
yeah,
a couple of minutes
yeah.
to go over questions. And then I wanted to add one more thing, if that's okay with you, Francisco. We have about 30% of attendees that responded. S4 is not really interesting for them right now, but they do want to bring down costs. So the top three, the bullets or circles that you have right here, those are actually the ones that you can still influence as a customer who's not going to S4. So as Francisco mentioned, with the samQ license optimizer software that we have, we can actually look into those areas and leverage that to bring down the overall spending, both on the license acquisition and the maintenance side. So just because you're not going to S4 doesn't mean that you can still optimize the cost structure. So I did want to just add that real quick for those 30% that we also have in the audience.
That's an important thing. I will I need to quickly go through that. You're right about the time, and sorry for that. Um, let's go one back still. One last point to that, and the point is discounts. Now, S/4HANA is of course something that is very needed by SAP. So this is a very good chance to correct your discount level. You may have a very good discount level with SAP, or you may not. Discount levels is a thing that is not really always justified on the market. So if you should find out that your discount level is not appropriate to your contract size, the renegotiation of going to S/4HANA is a good chance to correct that. So try to find out with the right assessment, with the right advisors, where you're at and where you should be at, and use the chance to migrate there. So very shortly on S/4HANA, on HANA right now, look into this. HANA runtime is a 15% of your license costs. 8% for the basic HANA runtime, and then the one with the business warehouse capabilities is 15%. But then if you go to the full use, you will need to license it per usage in 64 gigabyte units. Very important to understand there, you have volume discounting. Don't let salespeople hide this volume discounting in front of you. It is very important. It changes the price very relevantly, and I don't remember what the total discount may be, but fact is you may be paying up to 3 times what you should be paying if you don't look into volume discounting for S/4HANA. Then don't only plan for your basic needs. You need backup. You may need disaster recovery or high availability. You may need special things like geodata or integration, things like that. All of these are.
Francisco, are you still here? Francisco, I can't hear you anymore. I'm assuming that goes for the rest of the audience as well. So I'll just take over from here. I do apologize for the technical glitch. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about your roles and authorizations. We have about 13 minutes left, and like I said, I do want to have a chance to take questions. So now is also the time to start submitting the questions that you may have in the box within the GoToWebinar panel. So Francisco mentioned at the very beginning that S/4HANA really is a completely new product. It's not a successor to the existing ECC system that you may be using today. It's a, whoops, Francisco, you're changing my slides.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I lost my connection.
Oh, you're back.
I'm there again.
Nope,
Yeah,
no
sorry
worries.
for that.
So it's a completely new product, and with that actually come quite a few changes that affect the transactions within SAP, fields, objects, and on the flip side, obviously, your authorization concept. So if you've looked into the simplification list, it's around 1,000+ page document where you can look up all of the changes that impact your S/4HANA system after the migration. And this is obviously more critical to companies that have been running SAP for a long time and they're now moving over to S/4HANA. So specifically as it comes to roles, there's essentially 3 different categories of what can happen. The easiest one is where you have seamless continuity of the legacy ECC process, meaning that if you just carry on with your existing roles, there's going to be a portion of transactions, objects that are not affected, and everyone can just carry on with their jobs. The second one is sort of a built-in compatibility in S4 where the software itself redirects from something that is no longer available, but you have a little bit of sort of invisible support because it prevents the system from breaking. And then the most critical one that you want to avoid at all costs is receiving an error dump due to an obsolete transaction that's been run. Now, the important question for you to ask is, what user groups are actually impacted by this, right? How do I make sure that my employees are not going to be impacted negatively by this migration? and what roles need to be updated to avoid those issues. The interesting thing is that even in cases where we've seen companies do samples, it's often difficult to really reach 100% of the user base because you might have a small group of people that share exactly the same roles, but then you have also a different group of people that might have the same job description, but their access is actually made up of different roles that in combination allow them the same access, but it's very difficult to control for all of these scenarios. So you really need to look into the simplification list to understand the impact following your migration. So what are the 3 steps, right? You have your existing roles, assuming that you're a current SAP customer. There's certain transactions that are being used at your company. And then there's also your own development. So let's say, very easy example, you're using a Z transaction or a Y transaction. And in that, you've wrapped a standard SAP T code. Now, if for some reason the underlying T code changes, that also means that your custom program will break. So in general terms, if you wanted to do this by hand, it involves quite a bit of analysis of the simplification list. You want to understand what the impact is. So that's sort of the first 3 steps is your impact analysis. And then you want to mitigate. You want to build those roles differently. You want to use best practices. And this is also largely based on the new functionality that's coming with S/4HANA, right? A very easy example is the whole way that accounting works. So there's no longer a creditor and debtor functionality. It's completely changed. So that's just one example of where the business processes are completely new in S/4HANA. It's a very easy example. I think where it gets more complicated is where it's not as obvious that there's been changes that can impact your role design. So you can imagine going through a 1,000-page document doesn't sound like a lot of fun. That's definitely not my idea of a recreational activity. If you Google this whole idea of, can I find the contents of the simplification list? There's many questions on forums, but there's not really a single repository that would show you, hey, here's all the transactions that are actually impacted. Besides that, S/4HANA comes with a set of standard roles that our team has analyzed, and it turned out that they're quite insufficient for productive work. So we're not recommending to deploy them as is. You definitely want to spend some time overthinking your role design, your authorizations. It's usually one of those projects that many companies just put off because it's so much work. But now is the time to really fix this. All right, in contrast, I want to show you what our approach is with the samQ software. So I mentioned at the very beginning, we have 2 applications. samQ is the one that essentially allows you a centralized identity management, authorization management, and compliance control. So the way that we approach this is on the left side, we have the different data sources, and this applies to both brownfield and greenfield. We've actually taken the simplification list and loaded that into our samQ tool. So it will show you very quickly which of your roles are actually affected, and it can also take the right steps to remediate those issues. But what's actually quite cool is that if you look at this column right here, it shows you the contents of a sample role that you're currently using on ECC. And so when you're using samQ as the backbone for your role management, we can actually tell the software to compare the existing role to a reference role. So we're shipping the software with hundreds of predefined templates for different role positions, also for SOD conflicts and compliance alerts, but focusing just on the roles here, we can tell the software a given group of users. We want to make sure that there's no issues as we move over to S/4HANA. So we're going to create a extended role for S/4HANA that's based on their current access, mixed in with the reference role that we believe that position needs for S/4HANA. And then in the background, we're actually performing a trace. So if for some reason these people need access to a transaction that they're currently not authorized to access, we have this somewhat of a shadow mode where samQ is allowing them temporary access so that they're not running into permission issues. And then at the end of that trace period, you can monitor and check what the perfect role design should actually be. And this is going to be that combination of the old role versus what needs to be in the S4 role based on a reference model. And then you'll also see additional transactions that might be required for people to do their jobs. And because S4HANA is a pretty big migration project, the time is really ideal to look into your old role design. There's probably going to be a lot of transactions that have accumulated over time where people have way too much access that they shouldn't have. So it's a great opportunity to clean all of that up. And I hope you can kind of see the difference of using a software supported process versus just digging through everything by hand, especially if you have hundreds of profiles assigned to certain users. All right, so I mentioned this a couple minutes ago. Why is it important to invite your key stakeholders into the whole S4HANA conversation? So I've kind of broken this down into individual parties, and at the very top, you have the business that typically wants to implement the latest technology. They want to do things faster, better, make more money, be more efficient at a lower cost typically. But what does that mean for all of the other stakeholders, right? There might be non-SAP application owners. Let's say you're using Salesforce at your organization, or hundreds of different possible applications that are non-SAP products. You want to make sure that those work with SAP, right? So that's the area of indirect access. You want to make sure that that's accounted for as you're negotiating your overall contract with SAP. Bases and security. Those are the people doing the heavy lifting on the roles and all the license management. They're performing the annual SAP audit, and often they're isolated from the rest of the business. So let's loop these guys in and actually let them know what the overall mission is of what we're trying to achieve. Same goes with procurement. If the only focus is to get higher discounts, you're leaving out that demand management process that Francisco alluded to. So let's start actually at the baseline. What have we bought in the past? What do we need in S4HANA? And then let's use procurement as a resource. Let's give them all the information we have so that they can then negotiate a good discount, but only on the products we actually need. And then at the very top, we'll loop in the migration team. So I think that a lot of companies have this in reverse. They start just with the migration. Obviously, that costs a lot of money, so it gets a lot of the attention. How do you make that technical migration possible? But today we wanted to give you an idea of sort of everything else under the tip of the iceberg, which really drives a lot of the cost of the migration on the licensing side. And we're often talking volumes of 10, 20, 30, 50 or more $1 million worth of licensing purchases. And so now is the time to optimize those contracts, not after you've signed on the dotted line. So really only together you can anticipate what you need. You can mitigate potential issues also on the role management side, and make sure you're getting the best deal possible that you guys want for your business and not what SAP is recommending you get. Good, here's two offerings I'd like to present to you real quick that we've tailored specifically for customers going to S4HANA. On the role readiness side, we can actually do think of this as a proof of concept. We can use the intelligence that we have in our setQ tool to offer a check of your existing roles against SAP simplification list. So this is a great way to identify a couple of problem areas that might be popping up for you as you make the switch over to S4HANA. There's a couple of optional steps. We can actually automatically mitigate those things and help you with the design of the new authorization concept. But just to give you a taste and sort of show you the value of addressing these things up front, we do have the role readiness assessment. So this is on the role and access side. And then closing us out for the day, on the licensing front, Francisco has given you a couple of different options you need to consider as a customer. One of them is how to proceed with your named user licenses. Remember, we've given you that statistic of 60% of the past spend on SAP contracts was often going toward the user licenses. So it's a huge portion of existing and also future spend. And what we can do on the licensing front is actually use our samQ application to analyze your current usage of SAP for matches for the S/4HANA user types. The 30% of you that are not going to S4, we can do the same thing for the standard user types in order to show you some areas where we can trim the fat and allow you to reclassify your users into the lowest cost categories. So this is interesting not just for customers going to S4, but also to companies staying on ECC. But I hope you kind of get this idea of how you can proactively manage both the licensing impact and also the authorization management impact of the S/4HANA migration. So it's a huge project, it's a huge undertaking, and our bottom line for you today is don't just look at it from the technical migration path, really look into the specifics, because if you don't, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities to receive benefits and discounts for your organization, right? We're talking multiple $1 million here that you're managing. So now is the time to look into this proactively, especially as we're seeing an acceleration of the customer base adopting S/4HANA more and more. All right, so I do apologize that we've just hit the 60-minute mark. I understand if you have a hard stop and you need to go, but we still want to answer the questions that we've gotten. If you still haven't submitted your question, now is the time to do that. I will take them one by one, starting with a quick question for you, Francisco. We have a few that came in. Francisco, why don't you take this one? The question is, can you give me an example of how you lowered migration costs for a customer? I'll let you take that
one. Well, let me give you a good answer for that. I mean, there are so many different aspects. First of all, I already spoke about digital access. Digital access is SAP's negotiation tool to keep you away from third parties, from other companies like Salesforce, Oracle, etc. So in the digital access area, there is a lot of things that can be done. Secondly, of course, discounts. Discounts, we find quite a lot of companies that are not aware of the fact that they are on a quite well average discount level where they could be on a very much better situation. And third part of it, I already talked about shelfware. Most companies have something between 5 and 20% of shelfware that you can get rid of during those negotiations. Database, I have seen SAP proposals, as I already said, not regarding volume discounts, which made out something between $1 to $5 million just for a database of difference because of not taking into account the volume discounts. Those are some of the potential tools that you could use into the this kind of things.
Yeah, you know, as you bring it up, the HANA database, I think, is always an interesting anecdote. I do remember the one customer you worked with recently where buying 2 more units of HANA database, so what is it, 64 gigabyte increments, just buying actually more bumped them into the higher volume discount and ended up saving them $1.5 million just by buying a little bit more. And so it shows you that SAP is often not forthright with the volume discounts and those things, and it really adds up fairly quickly. And this wasn't even a massive client, so yeah, I think that's a good example.
Yeah.
Next question. I'll let you take this one as well. Do I need the new S4 user types, or can I keep my current licenses?
Well, there is an official answer and there is an unofficial answer. The official answer is you need to migrate your users to the new user types, and this is what SAP is telling everyone in every presentation. We saw it in Sapphire. So the official answer is yes, you need to migrate. The unofficial answer is we are seeing people with an ERP system who have already migrated to the new user types. Interesting. No reason to do that, but in the end, money is the only answer. And third part of the answer is we have seen clients that have managed the negotiations to keep their old user types. So user types is a purely financial question. It doesn't matter. We have also many clients that have specific customized user types for them. So everything is negotiable. I come back to that. And in the end, the only answer is, okay, these are my user licenses. What am I paying now? Where do I want to get to in the future? How can I manage to pay less than that? This is the only driver for user licenses. Have as few different as possible. You have already only 3 asides of that developer in S4HANA, that's fine. But of course, try to get as many of the cheaper ones as you can. I'm still surprised seeing so many people having like 80%, 100% professional user licenses. That's not really understandable for me, but you see those clients, so this is the occasion to change that.
Yeah, what you just said actually bleeds over into the next question. So, you've mentioned that there's both the option of keeping the existing licenses or adopting the new ones. I would just add to that if you do decide to keep your old ECC type user licenses, make sure they're cost optimized, right? So not just like Francisco said, carry on with 100% user population of professional licenses. And here's how that bleeds into the next question. So next question is, can you explain how to optimize user licenses for usage? I think you had that on one of the slides, Francisco. And so let me add a little bit more detail to what that means. So SAP contracts are typically written to specify the user license category based on underlying activity. So everything in SAP, when you click a button, you open a program, translates into the usage of a transaction. And so the way that our software actually works, the samQ license optimizer, is to automatically look at the history of what a given user has executed, what components, what transactions. And so based on that information, the software has a catalog of pre-classified SAP transaction codes. At this point, it's more than 100,000. And so the software can make sense of what's been used and what the right license type should be based on that SAP activity. And what you often see is that your users are over provisioned. So they have a very expensive license type, such as the professional, but they're only doing a fraction of potential SAP work. Let's say they're only doing goods received or goods shipped. And so in many cases, you can actually apply a much cheaper license type. And the professional in the old ECC days starts at $4,000, whereas something like a project user, a logistics user, those types of line of business licenses, they're a couple $100, right? So if you apply that logic to the whole landscape, this is the idea of usage-based optimization, and especially at the time of moving to S4HANA, do that analysis. Either do it yourself or use a software like our samQ tool, because there's a lot of money to be saved due to that optimization.
So we have one more answer coming from Anya Levi. Can you see it, or doesn't it appear on your questions list?
It's a fairly long question. If you want to try and take it, be my guest.
No, it's fine. I mean, Anya was basically asking for how to take advantage of SAP's move to the cloud, which is, and also their usage of audits to drive cloud adoption, to drive sales. Now, SAP has officially published that they are separating sales from audits. I must say, and if someone from SAP is here, we would like to hear that, but I would like to see that really on the market and with the clients. I'm not seeing that. So audits are still being very much used to drive that. Now, let's say the following. A migration program, when you go to a higher version of a software, is always difficult to justify as a business case. In this case, we have even the problem that migrating to S/4HANA is quite a big investment, a big bunch of costs. So how do you go to your management and justify this? Now, doing the same that SAP is doing and pressuring the client, putting pressure on the client to migrate to S/4HANA, in negotiations, we should, I think, go for two items. Number one, just take the S/4HANA migration as a business case. Push SAP to find a business justification for you. It is wonderful that S/4HANA has thousands of new functions, but what is the business value of these functions for my company in my special case? If I don't have an answer for that, I will hardly be able to go to my CFO and ask for 5, 10, 20 millions for a migration. This is number one. Number two, use the S/4HANA migration, which is a big project, to question S/4HANA. Now, you need C/4HANA. Well, there is Salesforce on the market. There are others. You need asset management. Well, there is Oracle on the market. There are others. In every single area where you may be considering a migration, not always may SAP be the answer. It may be the case, even considering indirect access. Well, even if you may be forced to pay indirect access for choosing another tool, it may still be interesting to migrate to another tool. So use this really with care. Take the time to analyze whether the single parts of your functionality of your modules, engines should be migrated to a new SAP product, to a new S/4HANA product, or maybe go another way.
All right, I think this is a good note to close on. Again, I do apologize for going over time a little bit.
Yeah.
I do appreciate those of you that stayed on for the Q&A part. I am showing you guys our contact information. As you can see, some of these discussions tend to become quite philosophical, and there's a lot of nuance to it. So let's continue the dialogue. Reach out. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions about licensing in general or you just want to discuss some thoughts with us. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you're a partner in the SAP space, let us know if you want to work together. We're always looking to help the most amount of customers save money, because this is a great opportunity as you're moving to S/4HANA. Last thing I'd like to ask you is to fill out the survey after the webinar. This helps us improve our content and check for quality. So once again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. My name is Seb. Francisco was on the webinar with me today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Muchas gracias. Mange tak til hver en, og pas på, og vi ses snart. Thank you. Good boy. Vielen Dank an alle.